Today I sat down for a conversation with Alexi, who is the co-founder and CEO of Lifeware Labs, an innovative startup who's revolutionizing the way that combat medics and first responders monitor vital signs and ultimately save lives. Crescent Industries worked closely with Lifeware Labs to develop a reliable and repeatable manufacturing process for their Pro Patch, the next generation in monitoring technology. So I wanted to know what the process of working with Crescent was like from idea to product, from his perspective, and ultimately why Lifeware Labs decided on Crescent as their injection molding and manufacturing partner. So now for my conversation with Alexi. So first of all, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it, and I'm excited about the conversation. So I know this is the first time that you and I are meeting, so I'd kind of love to just learn your background, a little bit about you, if you want to just go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name's Alexi Harlan-Beatties. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Lifeware Labs, and my background is engineering, and we spun Lifeware Labs out of Carnegie Mellon in 2018.
Yeah, so I'd love to kind of just jump right into it. So the big question of the whole thing is, why did Lifeware decide to choose Crescent?
When you're first starting a business, there's just so many open questions. And I think one of the main reasons we went with Crescent is we got the sense early on that Crescent would at least help answer some of the questions we didn't even know to ask. And that's huge when you're a small startup. That really is, because you're trying to figure things out the entire time, and so it kind of felt like, listen, we're being transparent that we're a small business, we're spinning out of this university, we're going to need help along the way. We're not going to be like some major customer that's very established and knows all the answers. So we're just going to have to figure this out together. And yeah, I mean, Crescent seemed willing and open to do that with us. So I think that was probably the number one factor. And this goes back, I mean, we've been talking to Crescent. I think I was talking to Kevin starting in 2018-ish, maybe even earlier. And so, yeah, we had those discussions early, and it just seemed like there was something there.
Very cool. Yeah, so kind of walk me through those early stages of the project, what that first engagement with Crescent was like for you.
Well, yeah, early on, it was a lot of like, banging rocks in the lab and seeing what works. So on our end, it was just like a lot of trial and error, quite frankly. And once we started getting to the point where, okay, I think this is what our product's going to be, we just call it Pro Patch. And we knew what it would look like. We knew the technology and the assembly and things like that, at least from a lab level, meaning like we could build this in-house, we could 3D print it and stuff, and we can solder it and all that good stuff. But when it came time to say, okay, we need to mass manufacture this, that's when I think the engagement started to ramp up a lot more with Crescent. And so that involved things like giving our design files, like our 3D model files, to Crescent. Crescent would modify those files to be compatible with injection molding. We would go back and forth a number of times because Crescent knew that we had electronics inside. So, you can't just change the enclosure and think everything's going to work fine. This device goes on the human body and it's intended to monitor vital signs. So actually the mechanical design plays a major role in, the vital sign accuracy and things like that. So that I would say that's when the engagement started ramping up, and that's where we used the DFM support quite a bit. And then eventually, we got to the point where we were ready to build our first mold and shoot our first parts. So I think that's how it started. That's like, those are the services that we use sort of like in the early stage.
Yeah, you had alluded a little bit there to sort of the complex assembly of Pro Patch and how it's a lot more than just an injection molded part. So I'd love to kind of pick your brain and get your thoughts on what are the biggest benefits you see of having a supplier that isn't just an injection molder, but is really able to help throughout the entire manufacturing process, all the way up through that more complex assembly.
Oh yeah, it's a one-stop shop. I mean, for us, it's extremely convenient and simplifies our supply chain. And keep in mind that this product, we're standing it up from nothing. And so not only do we make the design, we have to build the assembly process. And so that included Crescent. Crescent really simplified that process for us because obviously they do the injection molding. You guys do the injection molding as well as the assembly. So I think there was some foresight there in designing the actual part, because you guys were already thinking about how it's going to be assembled. And so, like, for example, in our particular case, we have like a top plastic enclosure and a bottom enclosure, and they get ultrasonically welded together. And if I'm not mistaken, that was all
Mhm.
Crescent's idea, and that worked out perfectly for us, with some tweaks, because we had to make sure that the electronics survive ultrasonic welding, which was a fun challenge. But yeah, I would say it made the overall, yeah, sort of process a lot easier. Things were designed, design decisions were made earlier on that affected the assembly process, and having the same entity handle both sides definitely made things a little bit more streamlined.
So, in that design for manufacturing stage, what we frequently refer to as DFM, what were the long-term benefits that you saw of us being able to help with that DFM process, and who did you work with for DFM?
Kurt was super helpful. He educated us a lot on a number of things. I mean, we would just have calls where he would share his training, he would just talk us through his design. And he did that many times. And I mean, that served a couple of functions. One was to just show us the work that he did and why he thought it was going to work. But the second one was to explain why he did those things, to help us understand. Because when we understand why you guys are doing certain things, then we can start having certain foresights in our own design as well. So I think that like level of communication, and that willingness to teach, hopefully mutually teach each other, but I'm pretty sure it was heavily towards us, because we needed a lot of teaching. But yeah, that helps. I would say quite a bit.
So obviously at this stage, we now have a design that we all feel good about. We're ready to move into the next stage of the project, which for us is kind of into that project management area where we're actually ready to take what is just a CAD file at this point, and start cutting steel and build the first tool. So kind of walk me through that process and who you work with there, and just your experience with the project management area as we moved into the tool build.
Yeah. So once we had these files sort of finalized, and keep in mind that process was pretty involved, I would say, because what we would do on our end is we would 3D print the designs that Kurt would develop. And so eventually we got to this finalized prototype. And yeah, it was just like sit back, relax, and let you guys build the tool. And that was very exciting for us. I remember getting the first parts. And keep in mind, while the tool's being built, we're still like sourcing materials, and
Mhm.
then there's just a ton of options. And it seemed like Crescent was well connected with material vendors and helped select the color, the composites. We had requirements. We're going to be we're in the process of putting together our first FDA application, and part of that process is making sure your device has all of the requisite markings.
Mhm.
And so that could be, laser cut markings. Those could be ink based markings. And again, that's another service that you guys provide for us. So all of that was sort of being planned during the tool building process. And so we worked very closely with Kim on that, and she just helped sort of, she was the quarterback, if you will, of this whole operation, and just was another tremendous asset and help for us. And we couldn't have done it without her. But yeah, once we had the first parts in hand, it was just like, wow, this is real. Like, this many years in the making, so many 3D printed designs. And then we finally had this thing that we could actually touch and feel. And it was surreal. That was a great milestone.
Yeah.
That was, yeah, it was something special for certainly for the team and for me personally.
No, it's always a very exciting part of the process when, for the first time we can actually put a part in a customer's hand. Maybe they've seen, a 3D printed version of it. Obviously, they've seen a CAD file, but when they actually have, that first finished part that is injection mold, that's always an exciting part of the process for all of us.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's we do both software and hardware. We have to. And I love both fields. But there's just, my background, I'm very biased, so by the way, because I'm a mechanical engineer. there's just something about that physical form factor, and it's just very satisfying. And there's like a very minor detail where our device has a button, just to turn it off and to interact with the device. And the button feel just felt so good. And I remember that moment when we first assembled it, the button felt great. So minor, right? Has like it's so trivial, you would think. But that was great that we got those tolerances right.
Yeah. So we've kind of alluded a little bit to one of the big differentiators that we feel really sets Crescent apart from our competition, and that's the fact that not only are we a tool builder, we actually started as a tool builder, but obviously we are also an injection molder. So what are the biggest benefits that you saw of, again, having a supplier that is able to do both sides of that, and having the person who is both building the tool also then eventually be the same supplier who is actually injection molding that part?
Well, I'm sure there were a lot of logistical upsides that uh, we didn't have to worry about. I mean, you could build the tool and then just move it over to your press in house, and there it is. So we don't have to worry about the logistics of that
Mm-hmm.
heavy tool. So that's good. And I mean, the fact that you guys know how to handle a heavy piece of equipment like that is great for us because we couldn't tell you guys how to do it ourselves. We're just a bunch of basement dwelling engineers basically, and just we're worried about the design itself, not as much as the manufacturing. So I think, yeah, again, from like the small business standpoint, it's great to have Crescent as like a one-stop shop. And again, it's one of those things where the enclosure was designed with laser marking in mind, with pad printing in mind, with ultrasonic welding in mind, with basically all of the post-processing steps. We were already aware of those during the design, the DFM process. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I think that's a great reason as to why it's great to just work with a single entity that's capable of that has all of those capabilities. It made our lives easier as the startup for sure.
Yeah. No, we definitely love to hear that. And like I said, we definitely feel that that is something that kind of differentiates Crescent from, the many other injection molders that are out there. Yeah. So you mentioned that you are a startup, and one of the things that can be challenging oftentimes for startups is sort of bridging that gap between, like you said, we're just 3D printing a part in a lab, going through maybe lower volumes of a couple hundred parts to maybe a few thousand parts, and then eventually ramping up into full scale production of thousands, tens of thousands, millions of parts in some cases. And even as a supplier, that can be a challenge sometimes. The type of steel that you build a tool out of might change depending on is this a prototype tool that we're just cutting out of aluminum, or is this a fully hardened and warranted tool that is going to make millions of parts? So how would you say Crescent handled that with your expected volumes, and what was it like bridging that gap from 3D printing a part in your lab to now we're actually scaling up, filing for FDA approval, and then hopefully eventually making thousands or tens of thousands of these parts?
Yeah, I mean, going from making one to two in our lab to making hundreds with Crescent was another major milestone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once it comes to mass manufacturing, you just want to make sure you can do it uh, reliably and repeatedly. That's something that Kevin drilled into me. He's
Yeah.
absolutely right. And it's we had to, as a part of that process, one of the final steps was like a what we call a functional validation step. And all kinds of different products have their own types of functional validation, but that's something where we just came up with our own functional validation and stood that up, and that's implemented at Crescent. So in our particular case, we have a simulator. We're not going to have like a human volunteer lay down and we can put this on them and make sure everything's fine. We have like a purpose built simulator that
Okay.
emulates the signals that a human body creates. And so we slap that thing on, we simulate vital signs, and we make sure they match up. So that was performed at Crescent. So not only is like the mass manufacturing of the hundreds of code batches done at Crescent, then that is tested as well. So basically, once it leaves the Crescent floors, we already know that it's working and ready for a customer. And then keep in mind that also includes like the boxing and stuff. So there's so many minutia you think you're done once you have the design, but you need to make sure that it ships okay and doesn't break in transit. And so, things like the packaging and the vacuum sealing and these basic things that you think you take for, I certainly take for granted as a customer when I buy something, but they're very deliberate steps from the manufacturing side. And again, that's another thing that Crescent does, and showed us how to do it, and it works great. From the business standpoint, we want to sell thousands, we want to sell tens of thousands, and our primary customers we anticipate are going to be U.S. military and domestic first responders, so EMS providers, air medical providers. We've had some early sales to civilian emergency medicine providers, but they're for clinical trial purposes and research purposes. So they can't be used because we don't have FDA clearance yet, they can't be used for medical decision making. But regardless, there's already been some interest from the research community because everybody's trying to miniaturize the gold standard patient monitors. They're humongous. They're extremely expensive. They weigh 10, 15 pounds, a ton of different cables. And just for obvious reasons, people are like, we can do better now. And that's what we're trying to do. So I think in the near term, again, it's just get that application out the door. And then in the long term, I think U.S. military in particular, as they're trying to push all of their medical care as far forward into a soldier's deployment as possible, so that if somebody's hurt or injured at the point of injury, they have the tools that they need, and they don't have to wait for, let's say, casualty evacuation. So that's sort of the long-term vision there. That is make those types of volume sales to key emergency medical personnel.
So sort of the big question of the whole interview, so I'm curious to kind of get your thoughts on this, but what would you say to a company that is thinking about working with Crescent?
I would just say they're just a great partner to work with. It's one of those things where, like, at the end of the day, you just want to, life is more enjoyable when you're working with people that you like to work with, right? It just seems so like fundamental, but the human aspect of it, I think, can't be understated because you spend a lot of time with them, right? Like, of course you want the product done right. Of course, everybody wants that. But I think the additional component is probably just the human element. And that's invaluable to me. So I would say that's kind of like, if I was talking to other companies, I'm sure there's a lot of, options out there. But if you want, again, from our experience as a startup out of Carnegie Mellon, if you want somebody who's got a lot of capabilities and is willing to work with you on some kind of amorphous problem and enjoy doing it in the process, I'd absolutely recommend Crescent. It's meant a lot working with Crescent and the team there. And we couldn't have come this far without you guys.
Fantastic. No, we love to hear that. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. Very grateful for the partnership, and we're excited to be a very small part of your product success.
Likewise. Thanks so much. Appreciate your time. And it was nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks so much. So thanks again to Alexi for taking the time out of his day to sit down and chat with me. I really do appreciate that. If you'd like to learn more about Crescent and reach out to us, I'll leave some contact information down in the description box below. Feel free to reach out to us, and we'd love to hopefully help bring your injection molded product to life.